right, guys, welcome back to the Casual Combat MMA show. We've got an awesome episode lined up for you guys previewing UFC 257, which is obviously the return of Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier, the second time they match up. Before we get into this, Cal, my co-host, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Had a lot of fun last night watching Max Holloway just tear apart Calvin Kattar. No, I'm kidding. We're recording this before the fights. I don't know. I'm doing great. I'm excited. We got an awesome week coming up. It's always exciting for a Conor card. That casual comes out a little bit in everybody. We're all excited about this.
Exactly. I know Conor catches a lot of flack, a lot of hate in the MMA community, but maybe that's just kind of the MMA community that we're a part of, the hardcores. But as far as casual MMA fans go, Conor McGregor is as big as it gets. And anybody that says they're not tuning into UFC 257 next weekend, right? Like you said, we're pre-recording this, so things may change, but they're lying, right? Cal, I have to address the fact that your environment has changed. What's going on there?
I thought that my two friends, these beautiful white-tailed deer, would like to be in the podcast. So I moved down into the basement. I'm actually in like our weight room area, but I thought this was pretty cool. I'm like, I got a couple deer in the corner, so people might like that, maybe.
I like it. Not necessarily special guests, but kind of. One thing I do want to talk about before we get going is we are going to be holding our second t-shirt giveaway. We will include some details about how to enter at the end of this podcast, so stick around, listen in, and you will figure out how to enter that giveaway. And yeah, let's get right into it. So these fights start a little bit earlier than we're used to, correct? Or maybe not these ones. Maybe that's just the Holloway Kattar, but I believe this one might be a little earlier as well because it's going down in Fight Island, and I believe they may be having a bit of a live gate there.
Yeah, they are. They're allowing 2,000 people into the arena.
Mm-hmm.
Here you go. I should have had that prepared. But the main card will be starting at great air right here. The main card is starting at approximately 9 p.m. So no, it's a normal
Okay,
start.
so awesome. So they chose to cater to the American fans over the European and the Abu Dhabi fans. So, I mean, I'm all right with that. That makes my night a lot better that night, and it makes it a little more exciting. So
it doesn't make it have to be an all-day event, if you know what I'm saying.
Exactly. Like I said already, kind of talking in circles here, but some of these fights may be subject to change, right? In the COVID environment and us recording this, a week and a half previous, right before Kattar and Holloway have even fought, right? This just makes sense not only from an optimization standpoint of getting the most attraction and attention to this podcast, right? Giving people the most time to listen to it, but also from an editing standpoint, it makes a lot of sense this week. So,
and we're just excited, and we want to talk about these fights.
Exactly, right? We're super excited.
Before we get one more thing before we get right into it. I want to comment on the special thing about that I see in a Conor McGregor card is a lot of times on these cards, luckily we have Hooker and Chandler. You see a lot of names that you've never heard of before, but the UFC is purposeful in the fights they put on a card like this. They're trying to spotlight guys who they think could become stars, who could be big names in this sport. So I would recommend you watch this whole card if you have the time.
Exactly. Right.
There's people who you haven't heard of who are going to blow up because of tonight or this night.
Exactly. And the prototype of somebody that they're trying to put on these cards are guys that can, wow you while also not having to pay those guys all that much, right? Because they're paying Conor McGregor so much damn money every time that he steps into the octagon.
And I think right off the bat, we got one of those guys. We have a guy named Amir Albazi. He's 13-1. He's 1-0 in the UFC. He's got 8 submissions, 4 knockouts. He's fighting Zhumagalov. Zhumagalov is 0-1 in the UFC. He's 13-4. Albazi, the guy who I'm highlighting a lot here, he's even. Zhumagalov is actually favored at -130, but I think Amir Albazi is a complete stud. He may be 1-0 in the UFC is all. He's 2-0 in Bellator. I watched a few of his fights. His scrambling is ridiculous. He's so good with positions on the ground, but he's also got a nuke of a right hand. He's got 4 knockouts, and just it seems like he can unleash that right hand from anywhere and knock guys out. And I did a little more research. He's an 8-time Swedish Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu national champ and a 5-time world champion. I mean,
Wow.
this guy is fantastic on the ground, but he also can box. He's not even necessarily the favorite in this fight, but I think he could be a huge problem in the UFC. I really think this guy could be a monster.
He's a favorite in your heart.
He is. I already like him.
Absolutely. And this is just me being dumb. What were the odds? You said he's not necessarily favored.
He's even, so bet 100, win 100.
Yep.
Zalgas is a minus 130, so a slight favorite. Which I disagree with. But the other thing I would say about Zalgas, I will give this to him. He's got 6 KOs in his 13 fights, and he's from Kazakhstan, so he can stand and bang, and he probably has a pretty good wrestling background as well.
Yeah,
so this could be a really fun fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in, and I will say that the next fight we're going to talk about is a featherweight bout between Movsar Evloev and Nick Lentz. Now, this one is kind of I couldn't find the odds here, but I know that they are massively in the favor of Evloev. I believe he's like a minus 450, maybe, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't have them written down here, but Movsar Evloev is 13-0-0, an undefeated professional fighter. But where the caveat comes in here is that he has no casual wins that I saw based on his record, right? I see 13-0, but I don't see any names that really stand out to me. Not to say that those guys aren't killers, just here at Casual Combat, I don't know every professional fighter in the UFC, let alone, the different promotions that he's fought for. And another thing is when you see a guy that's 13-0, there's different levels of 13-0, right? There's 13-0 with a couple split decisions. There's 13-0 with a lot of unanimous decisions. And then there's 13-0 with 12 knockouts, And I found that Evloev has a lot of decisions, right? A lot of unanimous decisions. So it's not like he is dominating and brutalizing his way through, at least in a flashy, exciting way. Maybe they're dominant wins. I truthfully didn't go and watch any of his fights, but Nick Lentz, on the other hand, who is a huge underdog, maybe the biggest underdog on the card, based on what I've researched, but he's 30-11-2, and he has losses to guys like Arnold Allen, twice to Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, Chad Mendes, right? So he has lost to the elite of the elite, but he does have wins over an old Gray Maynard, right? A legend of the sport, a former UFC champion, but obviously on the way out. But here is where I think that Nick Lentz can throw a wrench into things, fighting a guy that hasn't fought really anybody big yet, is that Nick Lentz has a sneaky win over Ill Will Brooks. Now, Ill Will Brooks, fighting out of Chicago, Illinois, may be somebody that a lot of people don't know, but Ill Will Brooks has 2 back-to-back wins over somebody that we're going to talk a little bit more about later in this episode, in Michael Chandler, right? And he has a knockout win over Michael Chandler, and he has a split decision win over Michael Chandler. So that one stands out to me, as Nick Lentz is for real, right? He may be aged, he may be a vet, and he may have some big losses, but his losses are Arnold Allen, Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, Chad Mendes, right? He's not lost to a guy like Evloev as far as a young guy coming up. He's lost to a lot of guys that are sitting at the top, but that being said, I'm still picking Evloev. But I think a bracket buster, you could say, or a parlay buster could be Nick Lentz in this card.
Nick Lentz is one of those guys who he never was able to break through. He can beat the lower guys. Every time he'd work himself up to a bigger fight, he'd lose that. And then he'd be back to square one, go over. You don't win 30 fights as a professional without being a killer at some point. But with that said, he is 36. He's fighting a 26-year-old who's never lost.
Yes.
Just that alone.
Although I agree with the favorite, I don't know if
you agree with
should be so big. If you got the money to burn and want to take a chance on a guy on this card, I think Nick Lentz may be that guy. Maybe you would disagree later on, but
let's hop into Marcin Prachnio and Khalil Rountree. Marcin is 13-5. He's a plus 260 underdog, and he is 0-3 in the UFC. And he's been knocked out 3 times, and 2 of them are just stone cold sleeping on the ground. He's lost to Sam Alvey and a guy named Mike Rodriguez, and I don't know who Mike Rodriguez is. So
Mike Rodriguez is the guy that didn't knee Ed Herman in the balls, I believe.
Yeah.
Remember, he kneed him in the stomach.
Yeah.
Then
And they stopped.
yes, that's Mike Rodriguez. Yep.
But Mike Rodriguez has a record of like 8-6 or something professionally. Yeah. It's you don't last very long in the UFC if that's a guy you get knocked out by. Khalil Rountree, on the other hand, is 8-4. He's 4-4 in the UFC, but he's got a win over Paul Craig, and his losses are two of his most recent losses are to Johnny Walker and Ian Kudalaba. He's got 5 knockouts. He's a guy who's kind of growing. He's still young. Maybe he'll figure it out, but I think they're giving him a matchup to send his opponent packing, maybe trying to find a new job. I really like Rountree in that matchup.
Yep. I would agree with that. Hopping around, let's highlight the first women's bout of the night, and it will be Sarah McMann versus Juliana Pena. Now, it is to note that with women's fights, and Cal and I talked a little bit about this off camera, sometimes comparing common opponents with women's fights are a little bit more difficult because they have so many common opponents, not only because there are very few women's weights, right? 3, maybe 4 if you want to count featherweight, but I don't believe we have rankings for that. I know Amanda Nunes is the champ, but the UFC doesn't really treat it like a real division. I know that we've seen some fights there, but that and women tend to bounce around and fight in multiple weight classes and multiple common opponents. So the names that I'm going to say may not really tell the tale, but I've got a few key determining factors in my opinion on who's going to win this fight. Sarah McMann, 12-5-0, Olympic silver medalist in wrestling. She has a combat pedigree that is almost unmatched in anyone in women's MMA, especially in the UFC. Her losses are to Amanda Nunes. She has a loss to Miesha Tate, Ronda Rousey, Ketlin Vieira. But she has wins over Jessica Ai and Lauren Murphy. Lauren Murphy recently has come into her own. Jessica Ai we'll talk about later today in the show. And she is fighting Juliana Pena, who is 9-4. She was just recently choked out by Germaine de Randamie, who is almost strictly a kickboxer, right? That submission loss does not really look very good as far as facing an Olympic silver medalist in wrestling goes. That's the big key factor to victory, I believe, for Sarah McMann. But Juliana Pena also has wins over Jessica Ai, just like Sarah McMann, and a win over Kat Zingano, right? So I think these are 2 fighters that are very, very equal in their abilities as fighters, but I think this stylistic matchup very heavily favors Sarah McMann with her wrestling pedigree and the fact that Juliana Pena got choked out by almost the purest kickboxer that the women's division has.
Yeah, I mean, McMann needs to just get this to the ground, and
yes,
it's over.
Take her down immediately.
I would almost at all costs, if you got to take a shot, I mean, don't get Ben Askren, but that's probably not going to happen in a women's fight.
Yeah.
But honestly, she needs to continually shoot takedowns and get this to the ground, because if it's on the ground, McMann is going to win, and it's going to be in a dominant fashion.
Yeah.
And in a fashion where Pena can't do anything about it.
Exactly. Juliana Pena is a plus 105 underdog, so basically even, and Sarah McMann is a 125 favorite. So a very, very close fight as far as the odds are concerned, but I like to think that my big brain's got this one figured out.
I would recommend betting on that one. That's a good line for bettors.
Yes.
Let's hop into another young fighter. Well, actually, I think he's 30, but Ottman Azaitar is 13-0, and he's fighting Matt Frevola, who is 8-1-1. Ottman is a minus 160 favorite. Frevola is returning with a plus 130 underdog. Ottman has 10 knockouts in his 13 wins. He has 2 submissions, so if you're doing math, he only has 1 decision win ever. So this is when we talk about, you got a guy who's 13, there's levels to this game. This guy is at the top level of the 13-0s.
Yes.
He is 2-0 in the UFC, fighting, as I said, Matt Frevola, who is 2-1-1 in the UFC. If you want a comparison, Matt Frevola recently had a split decision win over Luis Pena. This is a perfect spot for Ottman Azaitar to tee off on a guy and start making a name for himself. He's a minus 160 favorite, so I think it's worth betting on. And I'm really excited to see what this guy has. I know he's got fire in his hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To keep kind of the rebounding here that we've got going back and forth with these fights that we've done research with. The lightweight fight that I I don't think there's anything necessarily in depth to talk about this fight. I think this fight is going to be an absolute dogfight. We have Nasrat Haqparast, 12-3 in the lightweight division, or as a lightweight fighter. He has a notable loss to Drew Dober, who is one of the top rising stars in the UFC. Drew Dober is an absolute maniac. He is huge for a 155-pounder. But Haqparast does have a casual win over Mark Jacasey. Now, this brings me to think, and this is the casual in me, when I see a win over Mark Jacasey, I go, whoa, that's pretty good, right? Because Mark Jacasey might be a guy that a lot of people know, right? He's got the blood red mohawk. He's got a style that's mostly spinning kicks, and he's jumping in the air. He's not quite like Michel Pereira, but, his style is fun to watch. It's scary when he knocks somebody out. But then I kind of did a deep dive on Mark Jacasey, and I was like, well, I know Mark Jacasey's name, but I don't necessarily know who he's beaten. Mark Jacasey hasn't really beaten anybody of note. So that win, although it is over a guy whose name I know, doesn't hold as much weight as I once thought, right? Now, on the other side, Arman Tsarukyan, sorry, I had to say that one twice, 15-2, and his only notable fight, actually, is a loss by decision to Islam Makhachev, right? Islam Makhachev, a guy that we hold pretty high up in those lightweight rankings, even though he may be like ranked 11th or 12th right now. We know what Khabib has to say about Makhachev, right? You get through Makhachev, you get to me. Might be a little bit different since Khabib's retirement, but Makhachev is an absolute elite level opponent, so a loss to him doesn't really tell us much, right? So based off of, just what the odds say, right? Tsarukyan is a -240 favorite. Like I said, I don't really know what's going to go on here, but I did go with Tsarukyan just because these odds are so far separated that there may be something here that I'm not seeing, right? There might be something that's either a secret that the odds makers know or something obviously that I missed in my research. But, when you see a spread like that and you don't know much about either fighter, you just kind of got to go and lead with the odds there.
Yeah. Back to what you're saying about Mark Jacasey, I think maybe we need to start tiers to our casual wins. We might need to have casual A wins, which means they beat someone who we would consider a good fighter, about average, and then casual B wins, who would be like a Mark Jacasey. We know who they are, but you do a little further research and you realize that maybe that's not the most outstanding.
Exactly. Just because we know the name, doesn't necessarily mean much.
And eventually reading all these names, we're going to know a lot more.
Exactly, yeah. And if you're listening along, so are you.
Let's get into Makhmud Muradov. I'm kidding, that's not his real name. It's Makhmud Muradov. He's 24-6, 2-0 in the UFC, so it took him a little while to get here, but this guy's got a long career of fighting. He's got 16 knockouts. He's fighting Andrew Sanchez, who is 12-5. Andrew Sanchez is a +105 underdog. Muradov is a -135 favorite. His biggest wins would probably be Alessio Di Chirico. That's who we saw fight last weekend. I would say it's a casual B win if we're grading these now. But the other thing to note is that Makhmud has 13 wins in a row. So while he is 24-6, he's won 13 in a row, which means at some point he was 11-6, which isn't that great. But he obviously has figured something out.
Kind of like a David Dvorak, right? A guy who was like 14-3 and on like an 11-fight win streak, like somebody who figured it out.
Yeah, and he's only 2-0 in the UFC. His opponent is 5-3, so a little more experience. But I got to favor the guy who's got 13 wins in a row, and he's the slight favorite. I think the odds are about right with this fight, and I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah,
Muradov getting a win here.
I'm with you there. Jumping to a middleweight bout, I think that I'm making a bold prediction here, but we've got Brad Tavares, 17-6-0 versus Antonio Carlos Jr., 10-4-0. Now, stylistically, this is a striker versus a strict jiu-jitsu practitioner. Brad Tavares, he doesn't have any real notable wins that jumped out at me. Certainly guys that are high tier, and I'll talk to you about why I believe that they're high tier. I just don't really know who they are because of his losses, right? His last 4 losses are to Edmund Shabazian, who was undefeated when he beat him, Israel Adesanya, who was undefeated when he beat him, Robert Whittaker on his rise to the belt, and before that, Yoel Romero, right? And although I don't know any of the guys that Brad Tavares has beaten off the top of my head, even in looking at them, none of them jumped off the page. They must have been legit to put him in fights with Yoel, Izzy, Shabazian, and Bobby Knuckles, right? They had to have been.
What did this guy do to piss off Dana White?
Exactly. His last 2 losses were to undefeated fighters.
And he's like, oh, Dana, I don't know. I've been getting kind of beat up. Maybe we can tone it back. He's like,
Izzy.
Why don't you fight Izzy?
Yeah, exactly.
Why don't you fight Robert Whittaker?
So Brad Tavares is favored. He is the minus 155 favorite. But like I said, he is tends to be a striker. I mean, he's a rounded fighter, but he's a well-rounded fighter, not a rounded fighter. But, well, it depends. We'll see Saturday night. But he is fighting Antonio Carlos Jr., a Brazilian who has a win over Marvin Vettori, albeit a while ago, not a recent win over Marvin Vettori. And also, this is what really stood out to me, is that he has a grappling win over Gary Tonin, right? Gary Tonin is a name that maybe nobody listening to this podcast is going to know, but Gary Tonin, I believe, is an ADCC champ. He is a world-class grappler, elite jiu-jitsu practitioner, and a current, possibly undefeated MMA fighter in one championships. And this was not an MMA win over Gary Tonin. This was a grappling win over Gary Tonin. So that stands out to me as an absolute elite level grappler. And I think if Antonio Carlos Jr. can get this to the ground, I think Tavares is in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, Antonio Carlos Jr. is the underdog, a 130 underdog, but I'm taking him, right? I'm going with 2 dogs today. I'm going with Antonio Carlos Jr. as well as, I didn't go with Nick Lentz. I actually did not pick Nick Lentz, but I believe that he is an underdog that
there's value in that pick. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I totally back all what you're saying. We got a couple of women's fights here. I got Jessica Ai and Joanne Calderwood. I'm sure for the casuals, even that's probably names you've heard before. Jessica Ai is 15-8, and Joanne Calderwood is 14-5. Jessica Ai is a minus 110 underdog. Calderwood is a minus 120 favorite. Jessica Ai is 4-3 in the UFC, but in her last 5 fights, she's won 4 of them. So she started out 0-2. She's won 4 of her last 5. She's got a win over Caitlin Chikagian. That's definitely her biggest win. She has losses to Cynthia Calvillo and Shevchenko. Valentina Shevchenko, that is. Those are her last 2 losses, which are both high-level women's fighters.
And I want to interject here a little bit. Again, we always talk a little bit before this goes on. Jessica Ai has losses to both Sarah McMann and Juliana Pena that are fighting significantly earlier in the night. And we kind of had this conversation of, so many women fighters that have names that you recognize have always fought each other, right? So that's that common opponent. I didn't mean to interrupt. I did mean to interrupt.
I think you could take 4 fighters out of the top 10, and you could probably almost see what a round robin would look like of those 4 fighters that have 7-8 fights in the UFC.
Yeah.
If you're a top 10 women's fighter, you've fought probably half of the other top 10. Calderwood, on the other hand, is 6-5 in the UFC, with their most impressive win being over Ariane Lipsky. She's lost this to Cynthia Calvillo, Chikagian, Jessica Andrade. And while those aren't bad losses, she's only 6-5 in a division that keeps around a lot of fighters who hang around the average record. And you're fighting Jessica Ai, who's 4-1 in her last 5 with a win over Caitlin Chikagian. I got to go with the underdog Jessica Ai here.
Yeah, I agree. I have not been overly impressed with Joanne Calderwood, especially in her last, maybe it wasn't her last outing, but her last outing in which she was the number 1 contender and got submitted pretty quickly by, the name is escaping me, the last woman who lost to Valentina Shevchenko in her latest title defense. That's a name that I certainly should know, but don't. And, but I was not overly impressed, especially for somebody who at the time was the number one contender.
Yeah. And I think that's a -110 just guy. I think that's about as good as a bet as you can get on this card.
Yep.
With another women's fight, we have Marina Rodriguez fighting Amanda Ribas. Nelson and I have been corrected. It is Ribas, not Ribas. Marina Rodriguez is 12-1-2. She's got a win over Keisha Torres, a loss to Carla Esperanza. She has draws to Cynthia Calvillo and Ronda Marcos. So if you want to gauge where she's about at, she's about as good as those guys.
She's about as good as everybody else in the division.
Pretty much. The women's division is really bunched together.
Except when you get a standout like Valentina Shevchenko or, some of the dominant champions we've seen in the past. Yeah.
But Marina is a plus 250 underdog. And Amanda Ribas she's a problem in the women's division. She's 10-1. She's 4-0 in the UFC. Her last 3 wins have been a win over Paige Van Zandt, a win over Ronda Marcos, and a win over Mackenzie Dern. I think she's about as good as they get in the women's division. She's a -325 favorite, which is just slightly, that's the second biggest favorite on this card, I believe. She is as good as they get in the women's division. And I don't think she is very far from a title shot. I would be willing to say this is her last fight before she fights for the belt.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And is that our last fight up until the co-main?
I believe so. I've covered all of the fights that I got.
Perfect. Now we got our co-main event. We get to finally see the Bellator champ, Michael Chandler versus Dan Hooker. I'm going to quickly go over the records, and then we'll get into it. Michael Chandler is 21-5. He's a plus 115 underdog. His last win was against Benson Henderson in Bellator. He has losses in Bellator to Eddie Alvarez and Patricio Pitbull. Dan Hooker is 20-9. We last saw him in a battle with Dustin Poirier, who was fighting, obviously, McGregor on this card. He is 10-5 in the UFC. He started out his career, though, 3-3. So since then, he is 7-2. He's got a win over Paul Felder. I mean, Dan Hooker is a monster. Both these guys this is a great fight.
Dude, Dan Hooker might be the best guy in the UFC currently that has not fought for a title. He is the definition of literally the best measuring stick that you could get coming into the UFC with hype, right? Like when you fight Dan Hooker, you are either going to be put in your place or you are going to declare yourself a for real player in the lightweight division, right? I mean, Dan Hooker is an absolute murderer.
I want to stop here. I wouldn't even say a for real player. You are one of the top contenders if you beat Dan Hooker.
Yeah, you are right there with
3-4 in the division.
Yes, absolutely. And Dan Hooker, and even if you beat Dan Hooker, right, he is going to drag you to a place that is just pure hell, right? He's had so many drawn out wars, most of which he wins, some of which he loses, right? But I remember back, not too far back, to his fight with Dustin Poirier, in which Dustin looked like he got mauled by a bear. And he won that fight, right? So Dan Hooker is, like you said, an absolute perennial staple in the UFC lightweight division and was previously a featherweight. I don't know how he ever made featherweight, but, man, I'm excited for this fight. Michael Chandler obviously come in with all his hype. A 3-time, he defended his Bellator belt 3 times, got wins over Eddie Alvarez. This guy is an absolute beast. He's got wins over 2 former UFC champs and Eddie Alvarez and Benson Henderson. I'm excited for this one, man. And I have a reason of why I'm picking somebody, but I'm going to let you say your
First of all, I would like to have a little humble brag here. And last week I actually got to meet Benson Henderson, so
that is awesome.
Slightly on my guy Benson.
I'm sorry, I don't.
They were buddies now. We met for a total of 30 seconds, so cool with that. I'm pretty cool with Benson Henderson. Anyways, my problem with Michael Chandler is this. When Eddie Alvarez went to Bellator, he beat Michael Chandler. The first time Benson Henderson and Michael Chandler fought, it was a split decision win that people thought could have went either way for Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler did win. He's beat Benson Henderson twice. The first time being via split decision. Eddie Alvarez and Benson Henderson, when they went to Bellator, were past their prime. They were on their downhill part of their career. Still great fighters, but not what they once were when they were UFC champions. Michael Chandler is not going to be able to compete with the top fighters such as Dan Hooker. I think Dan Hooker is going to tear him apart and bring him to places he's never been before. And honestly, Bellator hasn't been the same since Ben Askren tore that whole league up.
That is also true. I do want to stop you, and I might be wrong on this, but I don't want this if one of us is going to be wrong. I believe that Eddie Alvarez, when they fought twice, I believe that was before Eddie Alvarez went to the UFC.
Really?
I believe most typically fighters go from the UFC then to Bellator. I believe Eddie Alvarez went from Bellator to the UFC and then claimed UFC gold. So I will say,
if that's true, then I close everything I said about Eddie Alvarez. I only mean what I said about Benson Henderson.
okay, that's fair. But regardless, right? I mean, a 1-1 record against Eddie Alvarez pre his run in the UFC or post his run in the UFC, I don't think that he fought prime Eddie Alvarez. I will give you that, just for different reasons.
Whether it was before, yes. It wasn't when he was the UFC champ.
So I would assume that you are choosing Dan Hooker because of what you just said about Michael Chandler.
Yeah,
right? I am also picking Dan Hooker just because I feel like, for kind of your same reasons, but the lack of evidence that we've seen from Michael Chandler. And before everybody hangs me out to dry and says, what do you mean? Do you not watch Bellator? Have you not seen Michael Chandler? I've seen Michael Chandler fight plenty, right? But it's in an organization that just isn't the UFC, right? Now, when a guy comes in from Bellator to the UFC, a guy like Ben Askren that didn't lose in Bellator, they're surrounded with mystery, right? Like maybe this guy hasn't beaten the best competition, but nobody's beat him, right? Who knows what his cap is? We've seen Michael Chandler lose twice to Will Brooks, once to Eddie Alvarez, once to Patricio Pitbull. Twice to Patricio, right? This is a guy that we've seen.
And one loss to Patricio was 2 fights ago or 3 fights ago.
I know, yeah. When he left Bellator, he was not the champ.
No.
Like, so, and not to say that Dan Hooker is the Conor McGregor of the UFC, right? I don't believe that Dan Hooker is the best fighter in the lightweight division, but we've seen him time and time again take the best guys to deep waters, right? Whether it's Paul Felder, whether it's Dustin Poirier, whether it's Gilbert Burns, right? He's taken those guys and proven that he is a for real stakeholder here in this division. Now, Michael Chandler comes in with a lot of hype, but in my mind, he's not surrounded by this hype or this mystery of how good is he. Like, he's good. Like, he is certainly a top 10 lightweight. And I'm even a Michael Chandler fan, but the fallacy that, like, there's this mystery coming because he's coming from Bellator, right? There's been numerous guys in Bellator that have put him away. So, there's no mystery. I think we know that Michael Chandler's a pretty good fighter, and we know that Dan Hooker is also a pretty good fighter, right? But it's a pretty good fighter in Bellator versus a pretty good fighter in the UFC.
And you said that Dan Hooker is not the best fighter in this division, which he may not be, but he also, if Khabib is truly retired, he might be, because you can't tell me that. If Poirier, what if Poirier beats McGregor? We'll talk about that in a second. What if Poirier beats McGregor? What if this just, in a crazy world, let's say that happens. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's going to happen, but if that happens and you made Dan Hooker and Dustin Poirier fight 10 times, you can't tell me that Dan Hooker doesn't win at least 4 of those.
No, I agree with you.
Dan Hooker he has potential. He could potentially, stars align, he could be a UFC champ, and he still might be someday.
I agree. I just don't think currently he's the best fighter in the lightweight division, but that's up for debate.
I don't think, I agree that he is not the best fighter.
I think he is the perfect. I think he is the perfect measuring stick for Michael Chandler right now.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I think Dan Hooker is underrated. I think he is really, really good, and he should be considered with the top guys in this division for sure.
Yes. After this fight, I think we are going to know exactly how good Michael Chandler is.
Absolutely.
Be it great or eh.
And let's go into this. How do you feel about the UFC's decision to sign Chandler if he loses to Dan Hooker? Because they gave him a huge paycheck, I know, because he's making more money than Poirier.
That is wrong.
That he's making more money than Poirier?
Yes. No, no, not you're incorrect. I said that's wrong morally.
Oh, okay.
Dustin is getting slighted there.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that too. But
No, I wasn't calling you out.
I was like, shit. I'm pretty sure like that was the whole deal with why Poirier wouldn't fight Ferguson is because Chandler's making more money than him. Mm-hmm. But I mean, as the UFC, what do you think Dana White? What does he want to happen?
I think he wants Chandler to lose.
I do too.
No, he gave him a big paycheck. I think he wants. I think he would be fine if he wins, and then he can get his money's worth for Chandler. But I think there's a part of Dana White to have the Bellator champ, this big hype train from Bellator, come in and get spanked just to prove. I mean, Dana White's got so much money, man. It's not like he's gonna break the bank, and he's going to be in financial ruin if Michael Chandler doesn't pan out. But if he doesn't pan out, it's just kind of like a.
Well, all these fighters, excluding Conor McGregor, are making pennies on the dollar for what Dana's making in these fights.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, there's no denying that. But yeah, that's interesting to think about. And also, what does that mean for fighters that want to come from maybe a UFC or a Bellator champ that wants to come to the UFC? What if Dan Hooker goes out there and just demolishes Michael Chandler? But that doesn't look good for the rest of Bellator.
No, it doesn't.
So I don't know. I'm excited for this fight.
Yeah.
I've said what I thought, but I'm excited to see it happen.
I'm excited too. I think we've covered our bases here.
Yep. Let's go into the main event. We have Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier, number 2. Conor McGregor is 22-4, a -280 favorite. Dustin Poirier is 26-6 with a +220 underdog. You know both these guys. Most people do. We just recently saw Dustin Poirier beat Dan Hooker. Dustin Poirier also has wins over a person like Justin Gaethje, who just fought for the belt. Dustin Poirier has fought for the belt.
Yep.
And we know who Conor McGregor is. He's the guy who slept Jose Aldo in the first round to win the belt. He's beat Eddie Alvarez.
Yeah.
I mean, Conor McGregor is Conor McGregor.
Conor McGregor is the number 1 legend of the sport.
Yeah,
maybe not the best fighter that we've ever seen, the number 1 legend of the sport.
Yes. Conor McGregor is the most important fighter to ever fight for mixed martial arts and the UFC.
Yep.
He
literally makes the UFC, but Conor McGregor is a household name.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot say that for any MMA fighter, maybe outside of Anderson Silva.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, to be honest, it would be worth the UFC taking a loss because they pay Conor McGregor so much money in a fight to have him fight.
Yes.
Because the amount of fans and eyes he brings on this sport is incredible. If you Google right now the top 10 most bought pay-per-views ever, like the top 8 are like all Conor.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Not quite. I think Ronda Rousey has like 1 in there too, and there's
I think he owns 4 of the top 5.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And the records that he tries to break are his own records.
Yeah, and he's going to get another one.
Yeah.
I think this could be the biggest fight ever.
Yep.
But let's actually get into this fight. They fought in 2014. So we're looking at 6.5 years ago.
Yep.
Obviously, Conor slept Dustin Poirier.
In quick fashion.
Yes. I think Dustin Poirier is a lot better than he was at that time. My problem is, if you look at Dustin Poirier after the Dan Hooker fight, he gets hit. You cannot get hit fighting Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Dude, there was a GIF on Twitter and I don't know who he was. Maybe it was Eddie Alvarez. Maybe Poirier was fighting Eddie Alvarez. And it's irrelevant who it was. But Poirier was kind of lunging and threw like a 1-2, kind of like a lazy combo as the other guy was backpedaling. And Alvarez didn't do it, just kind of just kind of backed off on it. And they gave the same GIF side by side of Eddie Alvarez going at Conor, doing the exact same thing that Dustin did to whoever he was fighting. And Conor just his counter striking is insane. And Dustin does kind of lean into a lot of his punches. Dustin's a great boxer, right? But I think his boxing maybe doesn't get less effective, but gets a lot more sloppy as fights go on. right? You saw it in the Dan Hooker fight, right? Just kind of boom, boom, boom. I mean, you cannot swing at Conor like that. You can't.
Unless he completely like gasses Conor rounds 1, 2, and 3, trying to wrestle him the whole time.
Yeah,
this is a really tough fight for Dustin Poirier to win.
I agree.
And he can even be winning the fight. He can be winning the fight rounds 1, rounds 2, and then round 3 he gets hit once because Conor is at some point going to find that spot where he can hit Dustin Poirier and hurt him really bad.
Yeah. I don't see Dustin winning this fight. And I don't even think it's a casual take. I know a lot of people dislike Conor McGregor. As far as people who claim to be hardcores, right? They say he's overrated, which he may be. He may not be the Mystic Mac that we all think of him as. But, man, I don't see it. And I do believe that Dustin Poirier has gotten a lot better since their last meeting. And I'm not even sure Conor has gotten any better since their last meeting. But I'm not sure Dustin Poirier got that much better.
Well, the evidence is in the last fight. He still gets hit.
Yeah.
Even you could give me Poirier, and I know this is crossing weight classes. You could give me Poirier versus Chaos Williams. Obviously, Poirier is way more accomplished, has beat way more top-level opponents. I would favor a person like Chaos Williams, or be at least very worried, because I know a person who possesses the power to knock out Dustin Poirier with one punch is a very dangerous fight for him.
Yeah.
Hooker, great fighter, has finishes, has knockouts. He's not someone you think of when you think of someone who's going to land one punch that puts you to sleep.
I agree.
Conor McGregor is, and that is very dangerous for Dustin Poirier, a guy who gets hit.
And it's proved to be very dangerous for him in their first meeting.
Absolutely. And I would say the same for a guy like Tony Ferguson. Like, there's certain people who you can't get hit by.
Yeah.
Francis Ngannou, you cannot just decide you're going to take a couple and trade with him. There's just certain people who you can't do that.
Yep.
And that's why McGregor is this big a favorite. And honestly, I would still bet on McGregor because I really think this is a terrible matchup for Dustin Poirier.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd be betting on this fight just because he's such a big favorite.
Well, I'd bet on knockout too.
Yeah, I mean, my pick is easily Conor McGregor.
Yeah,
and I'm not afraid to say it. I'll shout it on top of the casual MMA Twitter mountain that I believe that Conor McGregor is going to sleep Dustin Poirier.
And I couldn't be more excited for any other fighter, basically, than seeing Conor McGregor fight Dustin Poirier this weekend.
I know. I'm so excited.
Excited. The last time Conor McGregor fought, Nelson and I were at Brothers. No, we weren't. We were at
Howie's.
It was a bar in La Crosse, a bar, grill, whatever we were watching. And you can go there for other UFC fights, and nothing is like a Conor McGregor fight night.
You can go for other UFC fight, like main events, or I'm sorry, pay-per-view events, and there's nobody really there.
Mm-hmm.
And we couldn't even get a table.
We were so far away from a TV, and you showed up like 2 hours early before the times. You're just sitting there.
Dude,
waiting.
Conor McGregor has just such a mysticism around him and such an ability to draw eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous.
It's great for the MMA and UFC fighting.
It is. Say what you want about Conor as a person. Say what you want about Conor as a fighter, man, but you can't say anything about his ability to draw attention.
And for the people who are like, oh, Conor's really not that good, he's 22-4.
Yeah.
I mean,
and his losses are to Khabib, Nate Diaz, and to when he was like still before even Cage Warriors.
Mm-hmm.
He was a plumber, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and he came back and beat Nate Diaz the next time.
Yeah.
Who was bigger than him.
Yes.
But I think that wraps up the card. Should we do a quick rundown of the card? I'll say the fight and we say who we got.
Absolutely.
All right, so now I got it on. Let me get this in order. Sorry, fans around the world.
Around the world, worldwide. We are worldwide, probably.
Where did we have? We had views on our website from all over the place.
Like 7 from China, a few from Ireland.
Oh, that makes sense. Look at you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey.
First fight of the card, we got Amir Albazi versus Zhumagalov. I think I got Amir Albazi via knockout.
I am also going with Albazi. I am truthfully not educated enough outside of your prediction. I'll take a decision, but possibly knockout.
Then we got Marcin Prachnio versus Khalil Rountree. I believe I'm going with Rountree. I think that's a good fight, but I think Rountree will win that.
I'm also going to go with Rountree. I don't know how.
Next, we got Ottoman Azaitar versus Matt Frevola. I was very adamant on Azaitar when I talked about him, and I got him here again.
I got Azaitar as well. Having watched his latest fight, he's awesome.
Yeah, that's a good fight to watch.
Yes.
Now we got Mahmoud the Murderer Muradov versus Andrew Sanchez. I got the Murderer.
I also have Muradov.
Then we got Nick Lentz and Movsar Evloev.
Evloev. I'm going with Evloev, although I don't think the odds stack up correctly, right? Evloev is a minus 450. I think the fight's closer than that. However, I'm still taking Evloev.
I'm going to take Evloev via TKO in the third round. I don't know why I feel confident about this. I think Nick Lentz is going to win the first round, and then Evloev is going to fight a close second round and then finish him in the third round.
Fair. I don't know how you are backing that up at all, but
I have nothing to back it up. That's just what I think.
It's just your prediction. Okay.
Jessica I versus Joanne Calderwood. I believe I
think you had I.
Jessica I.
I will also. I'll second that notion. Man, we need to disagree more, dude.
I know. Stop. I'm saying mine first. You're following me.
That's true.
Marina Rodriguez and Amanda Ribas. I think we Ribas via destruction. I don't know, submission or knockout, but it's going to be bad.
Yeah. We got Sarah McMann versus Juliana Pena. I'm going with Sarah McMann, the Olympic silver medalist. Definitely, and I'm going to say a submission win over Juliana Pena. If Jermaine Durandame could submit her, Sarah McMann can submit her. Undoubtedly.
And undoubtedly, Sarah McMann knows that she got submitted by.
Yes, that's the clear path to victory, right? As her being a grappler. At lightweight, we have Nasrat Haqparast versus Arman Tsarukyan. Again, this was one that was kind of hard, but I ended just siding with the odds with Arman Tsarukyan. I'll say via unanimous decision.
I'll go with Nasrat just because I want to pick someone different from you. I'm going to pick him.
That's fair. And my hot take of the day, of the week, Brad Tavares versus Antonio Carlos Jr. I'm going Antonio Carlos Jr., the plus 130 underdog via knockout in the first round. I'm kidding. Submission.
I was so excited.
No, he's going to submit him. He's the grappling savant.
I was like, wow, this is crazy.
I'm not sure Antonio Carlos Jr. has knocked out anybody ever. But we'll see.
I'm going to go against you. I'm going to take Brad Tavares via knockout in the second round.
That is the second most likely. Well, that's probably the most likely outcome if we're being honest. But yeah, I think this card is going to be absolutely awesome. One thing I want to revisit, unless you've got anything fight.
We both are picking Hooker and McGregor, right?
Oh, duh. Yeah. Sorry, we didn't revisit the co-main and main event. Yeah,
we're just gonna throw that out.
Yeah, who cares about those ones?
And I'm picking Hooker via knockout in the second round, TKO.
I'll pick Hooker. Oh, I'll pick Hooker via decision, and I will take Conor McGregor via knockout.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
that's such a good card.
Oh man, it's awesome. I can't forget to talk about the giveaway, right? So if you've hung around this long, or if you just fast forwarded to the end to see how to get the giveaway, A, you didn't listen to any of our stuff, but B, we're going to tweet on Sunday right after the Holloway Cater card as this episode is coming out, and we are going to tweet. All you're going to have to do is favorite and retweet that tweet, and then you will enter your name one time. And Cal, you want to talk about other ways to enter?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be following us too. You can't.
You must be following. Follow, like, retweet.
Other ways you could get in, you can get multiple entries, and I'm going to give you ways to get 3 entries. You could be in the drawing 3 times, get yourself a Casual Combat shirt. They're really cool. They're maroon. They say Casual Combat Podcast. They look super dope. They're comfortable. I'll mail that to your house. You'll have that forever.
We'll have to know where you live.
So that's something you need to consider before you do any of these things is, do you want Nelson and I to know where you live? I'm kidding.
Yes.
I won't. Well, it's up to you. Some people might want
Okay,
that.
what are the other ways?
Okay, other ways. You can leave a comment on this YouTube video. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment and leave your Twitter in the comment. Say something. Give us what you think. Give us your picks. Anything. Whatever.
Your feedback is awesome.
Yes, we really appreciate that. And the other way is if you are listening on iTunes or Spotify. If you listen on either Apple or Spotify, go on there, leave a review with your Twitter and that'll get you another entry into the contest. You could have possibly 3 entries to win a shirt. If you really want that shirt, 3 times. I hate to say it, but if you already reviewed our podcast, it doesn't let you review it again, so you can only get 2 then.
And also, for those of our worldwide following, the last giveaway that we had didn't have many entrants, right? So the entrants had like a 1 in 12 chance to win a shirt, right?
The guy who won it had 3 out of the 21 entries.
Absolutely. Right. So if you want a free shirt, right, just do those simple things and we will get the shirt
you could
in
get
your hands.
You could review us on Apple and Spotify.
Sure, you could get 4.
Just leave your Twitter so we know where to find you.
Absolutely. But yeah, outside of that, I think we're done. I think we're good. I think we nailed this episode. Hopefully this is going to be out. Well, not hopefully. It will be out on Sunday right after the Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar card. Man, I really, really, really hope that all of these fights hold up and all of these fights are really happening. If any of these change, we'll be probably releasing a mini episode throughout the week and talking about, if any major things change. But outside of that, thanks for tuning in and
check out the website, casualcombat.com.
casualcombatmma.com.
MMA.com. I don't even know. Nolan Baker's doing some great writing on there for us. If you want to read some really cool articles, or if you want to submit articles, as we talked about before, check that out.
Absolutely. Lots of cool things happening over here at Casual Combat. All right. Thanks, guys.